Did you know that nearly 7 out of 10 Canadian households are drowning in debt? And many are just one missed paycheck away from financial disaster? It sounds unbelievable, but the truth is, Canada often seen as one of the most stable economies in the world may be standing on a dangerous cliff edge. Imagine this: soaring housing costs, record high grocery prices, and interest rates climbing so fast that families are being forced to choose between paying the mortgage or putting food on the table. Behind the shiny skyline of booming cities lies a troubling reality. Millions of Canadians are quietly struggling, and the warning signs of an economic collapse are flashing brighter than ever. But what's driving this crisis? And more importantly, could the entire Canadian economy be headed toward a breaking point? Stay with me, because today we're uncovering the 10 powerful reasons that may push Canada over the edge. Number 10. Political and policy uncertainty. When it comes to the economy, confidence is everything. Investors, businesses, and even everyday families make decisions based on how stable and predictable the future looks. But in Canada right now, that confidence is starting to crack. One of the biggest red flags is the country's soaring government debt. Massive spending during the pandemic, combined with ongoing social programs and subsidies, has left Ottawa with a financial burden that grows larger each year. The problem isn't just the debt itself, it's the uncertainty about how it will be managed. Will it mean higher taxes, deep cuts to services, or even more borrowing that could spiral out of control? At the same time, shifting policies around energy, climate change, and immigration create even more unpredictability. For example, frequent changes in energy regulations have made global investors hesitant to pour money into Canadian oil and gas, one of the nation's key industries. Meanwhile, debates around housing policy and immigration levels fuel public frustration, especially as affordability crises worsened. Political divisions only add to the instability, with parties sharply split on how to handle spending, housing, and natural resources. The future direction of the Canadian economy feels uncertain and volatile. And in times of uncertainty, businesses often pull back investments, while global investors look for safer markets. The result? Slower growth, fewer job opportunities, and a fragile economy that could tip into crisis with just one global shock. Political and policy uncertainty doesn't just create confusion in Parliament, it creates real financial pain for Canadians trying to plan for their future. Number 9. Global supply chain vulnerabilities. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's this: Canada is far more dependent on global supply chains than most people realized. From empty shelves at grocery stores to long waits for cars, electronics, and even life-saving medicines, Canadians felt firsthand what happens when those supply chains break down. The challenge is that Canada doesn't produce everything it needs. We rely heavily on imports for essentials like pharmaceuticals, technology, and manufactured goods. Even much of the food on Canadian tables, fruits, vegetables, and packaged items, comes from outside the country. That means any disruption, whether from global conflicts, shipping delays, or natural disasters, can ripple through the economy almost instantly. Consider the semiconductor shortage that crippled the auto industry. Canadian plants slowed down or shut temporarily, leading to layoffs and billions in lost revenue. Or think about how a sudden spike in fuel prices can drive up the cost of transporting goods across such a vast country, making everything from milk to construction materials more expensive. And it's not just about shortages. Supply chain instability fuels inflation. When goods become scarce or delayed, prices rise. Families are left paying more for less. Businesses struggle to stay afloat, and consumer confidence takes a hit. To make matters worse, global tensions like the ongoing war in Ukraine or trade disputes with China make supply lines even more fragile. For a country like Canada, which depends on stable trade routes and international cooperation, these vulnerabilities are a ticking time bomb. In short, every Canadian feels the impact of supply chain shocks, whether at the checkout counter, in delayed deliveries, or through higher taxes to support struggling industries. It's a weakness that exposes just how fragile the Canadian economy really is. Asterisk. Number 8. Aging population, one of the silent.
Hi,
But most serious threats to Canada's economy isn't happening in boardrooms or stock markets. It's happening in the population itself. Canada is aging faster than ever before, and this shift is reshaping the economy in ways many people don't realize right now. More than 1 in 5 Canadians is over the age of 65, and that number is only expected to grow. As people retire, the number of workers paying into the system shrinks, while the demand for healthcare, pensions, and social services skyrockets. This creates an enormous financial strain on government budgets, which are already stretched thin. Think of it this way. Fewer people working means fewer taxes collected. At the same time, more seniors mean higher spending on hospitals, medications, and retirement benefits. That imbalance could force the government into tough choices: higher taxes, reduced services, or even more borrowing. For younger Canadians, this trend raises tough questions about the future. Will they end up paying more but receiving less? Will today's workers have access to the same benefits when they eventually retire? The aging population also hits the labor market. As experienced workers retire, many industries face labor shortages. Skilled trades, healthcare, and even high-tech fields are already struggling to replace the talent they're losing. Immigration has been used as a solution, but it comes with its own challenges, including housing and infrastructure pressures. Put simply, an aging population acts like a slow-moving economic storm. It may not grab headlines the way housing bubbles or inflation do, but over time, it erodes growth, limits innovation. Fear and places enormous stress on younger generations who carry the financial burden. This is more than a demographic trend, it's a structural weakness that could hold Canada's economy back for decades. Number 7. Weak productivity growth. Behind every strong economy lies one key factor: productivity. It's not just about how many hours people work, it's about how much value they create in those hours. Fortunately, Canada has been struggling with weak productivity growth for years, and the consequences are becoming harder to ignore compared to other advanced economies. Canada is falling behind in areas like innovation, technology adoption, and investment in research and development. While countries such as the United States and South Korea are racing ahead in artificial intelligence, its advanced manufacturing, and green technologies, Canada risks being left in the dust. Why does this matter? Because low productivity means slower economic growth, weaker wages, and fewer opportunities for Canadians. If businesses can't produce more with less, they can't compete globally, and when they can't compete, jobs and investments start moving elsewhere. Part of the issue comes from underinvestment in both technology and infrastructure. Many Canadian companies are hesitant to scale up, preferring to play it safe rather than take risks in innovation. Add to that limited access to venture capital and smaller domestic markets, and you get an economy that often feels stuck in second gear. This stagnation hits everyday Canadians too. When productivity lags, wages struggle to rise in real terms. Workers may put in the same hours or more, but still feel like they're falling behind as living costs soar. Economists warn that without serious changes, like boosting innovation, improving training programs, and encouraging investment, Canada could lock itself into a cycle of slow growth and declining competitiveness. Weak productivity growth isn't as dramatic as a housing bubble or a stock market crash, but make no mistake, it's one of the deepest cracks in the foundation of Canada's economy, and if ignored, it could quietly erode prosperity for generations. Number 6. Trade dependency on the USCA and IA prides itself on being a trading nation. But there's a catch: most of that trade depends heavily on just one partner, the United States. In fact, nearly 75% of Canadian exports flow south of the border. That means when the U.S. economy sneezes, Canada almost always catches a cold. This reliance creates serious risks. If the U.S. faces a recession, cuts spending, or raises trade barriers, Canada feels the shock almost instantly. Factories slow down, resource exports fall, and thousands of Canadian jobs hang in the balance. We saw this clearly during the 2008 financial crisis, when U.S. demand for Canadian goods collapsed, dragging Canada's economy down with it. The auto industry is a perfect example. Vehicles and parts cross the border multiple times before reaching a customer. Any disruption, whether from tariffs, border closures, or supply chain delays, throws the entire system into chaos. The same goes for energy exports, lumber, and even agriculture. The challenge here is that overdependence equals vulnerability. While Canada has tried to diversify trade with agreements like CETA with Europe and CPTP with Asia-Pacific nations, the U.S. remains the dominant buyer. That's a risky strategy in a world of shifting geopolitics and trade wars. For ordinary Canadians, this dependency shows up in the form of job losses when industries tied to U.S. demand struggle. Communities built around manufacturing or resource exports are especially at risk. And if the U.S. ever decides to prioritize its own economy through protectionist policies, Canada could be left scrambling. In short, while the close partnership with the U.S. has fueled prosperity, it also ties Canada's future too tightly to forces beyond its control. Without broader diversification, this dependency remains a major weakness in Canada's economic foundation. Number 5. Rising interest rates. For years, Canadians got used to something that felt almost normal: cheap borrowing. Low interest rates made it easy to buy homes, finance cars, and run businesses. But that era is over. To combat runaway inflation, the Bank of Canada has raised interest rates to levels not seen in over a decade. And the ripple effects are hitting millions of Canadians hard. The most obvious impact is on homeowners. With so many people carrying massive mortgages, even a small rate hike means hundreds or even thousands of extra dollars in monthly payments. Families who stretched their budgets to buy during the housing boom are now finding themselves on the edge, struggling to keep up with rising costs. Some are being forced to sell their homes, while others cut back on essentials just to make ends meet. Businesses aren't spared either. Higher borrowing costs make it tougher for small and medium-sized enterprises to expand, hire workers, or even stay afloat. When credit dries up, innovation slows down, and job creation stalls. And then there's the government itself. Canada's national debt has ballooned, and rising rates mean higher interest payments on that debt money that could have been used for healthcare, education, or infrastructure. For ordinary Canadians, rising interest rates feel like an invisible tax. Credit card balances, car loans, and student debt all become more expensive. The weight of debt gets heavier, while wages fail to keep pace. The bigger danger? If rates stay high for too long, Canada could slide into a recession. Consumer spending slows, businesses cut back, and unemployment resets a dangerous cycle that can be hard to break. In short, rising interest rates are more than just numbers on a chart. They're a powerful force, squeezing households, businesses, and governments all at once, threatening to turn an already fragile economy into a full-blown crisis. Number 4. Inflation pressures. If you've been to a grocery store lately, you've probably felt it: prices climbing higher and higher, leaving your wallet emptier with every trip. Inflation in Canada has reached levels not seen in decades, and while the numbers may sound abstract, the reality is deeply personal. Basic necessities like food, fuel, and housing are rising faster than wages. Families that once managed comfortably now find themselves cutting back, swapping fresh produce for cheaper alternatives, or skipping small luxuries altogether. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a daily financial squeeze that erodes quality of life. The problem with inflation is that it creates a vicious cycle. As costs go up, workers demand higher wages to keep up. Businesses, in turn, raise prices to cover those wages, feeding the inflation spiral. For Canadians on fixed incomes like retirees, the pain is even sharper, as their money buys less and less each year. And inflation doesn't just affect consumers, it shakes business confidence too. Companies delay investments because they can't predict costs, and small businesses struggle to survive when suppliers raise prices every few months. This uncertainty weakens growth across the entire economy. Government efforts to tame inflation, mainly through higher interest rates, can sometimes make things worse. By slowing the economy and putting more pressure on indebted households, it's a delicate balancing act with no easy solutions. For ordinary Canadians, inflation feels like a silent thief. It eats away at savings, limits choices, and makes dreams like home ownership or retirement feel further out of reach. Left unchecked, it can trigger deeper instability as people lose confidence in the economy and in their ability to plan for the future. In short, inflation pressures aren't just temporary bumps. They're a serious warning sign that Canada's economy is overheating and becoming dangerously unstable. Number 3. Dependence on natural resources. Canada is blessed with an abundance of natural resources: oil, gas, lumber, and minerals, and for decades, these industries have fueled the nation's growth. But this blessing can also be a curse. An economy leans too heavily on resources, becomes vulnerable to global price swings and demand shocks. Take oil, for example. When global prices are high, Canada's energy sector booms, creating jobs, boosting exports, and filling government coffers. But when prices crash, as they did in 2014, entire provinces like Alberta face mass layoffs, business closures, and budget deficits. That volatility makes long-term planning nearly impossible, both for governments and for ordinary families. Natural resource dependence also ties Canada's fortunes to external forces beyond its control. A slowdown in China can lower demand for Canadian minerals. International tensions can disrupt oil and gas markets overnight. Even global pushes toward renewable energy threaten to leave Canada's fossil fuel reserves less valuable in the future. Meanwhile, over-reliance on resources can stunt growth in other areas. Economists call this the resource curse. When a country focuses too much on commodities, sectors like technology, manufacturing, and innovation often fall behind. Instead of diversifying, the economy becomes dangerously one-dimensional. And the environmental side can't be ignored. Growing international pressure to cut carbon emissions has put Canada's energy sector in the spotlight. Uncertainty over pipelines, climate policies, and carbon taxes makes investors nervous and slows development. For everyday Canadians, this dependence shows up in job insecurity, government budget cuts, and unstable provincial economies. Our oil worker may thrive one year, only to face unemployment the next, all because of fluctuations thousands of miles away. In short, while natural resources remain a pillar of Canada's economy, overdependence on them leaves the nation exposed, unstable, and at risk of being left behind in a rapidly changing global economy. Number 2. Record household debt. Canada has a troubling distinction. It holds one of the highest household debt-to-income ratios in the developed world. For every dollar Canadians earn, they owe more than $1.80 in debt, a figure that has steadily climbed over the past 2 decades. Most of this debt comes from mortgages. With housing prices soaring to historic highs, families have taken on massive loans just to secure a place to live. Add in car loans, student loans, and credit card balances, and the picture becomes even more alarming. The real danger shows up when interest rates rise or incomes fall. Suddenly, what felt manageable becomes overwhelming. Families who stretch to afford their dream home now find their monthly payments skyrocketing. Others are forced to rely on credit cards for groceries and essentials, digging themselves into an even deeper hole. This debt burden doesn't just affect individuals, it weakens the entire economy. When households spend most of their income servicing debt, they have less money left for restaurants, travel, local businesses, or investments. Consumer spending, which makes up a huge part of Canada's GDP, slows down. Even worse, high debt makes the economy more fragile. If job losses or another recession hit, heavily indebted families could default on loans, triggering a ripple effect through banks, housing markets, and government finances. In the worst case, it could look like a domino collapse. For everyday Canadians, record household debt feels like living under a constant shadow. It limits freedom, fuels anxiety, and makes financial security feel out of reach. And unless wages rise significantly or housing becomes more affordable, this mountain of debt will only keep growing. In short, Canada's record household debt is not just a statistic. It's a ticking time bomb that threatens to drag millions of families and the economy itself into crisis. Number 1. Housing market bubble. Perhaps the most alarming threat to Canada's economy is the housing market bubble. Across the country, home prices have soared to levels that are completely detached from average incomes. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, the cost of a modest home is now measured in millions, while wages have barely budged. This creates a dangerous imbalance. Young families and first-time buyers are pushed to the sidelines, forced to either rent indefinitely or take on massive mortgages that stretch their finances to the breaking point. For many, the dream of homeownership is no longer realistic. It's a financial gamble. The risk isn't just affordability. When prices rise too fast and are driven by speculation, a bubble forms, and like all bubbles, it can burst. If housing prices begin to fall sharply, homeowners could find themselves owing more than their property is worth. This negative equity scenario has devastated economies before, most famously during the 2008 U.S. housing crash. Canada's situation is particularly fragile because so much household wealth is tied to real estate. A sudden downturn could wipe out savings, shrink consumer spending, and send shockwaves through the banking sector. Banks, which hold billions in mortgages, could face rising defaults, putting the entire financial system under pressure. Even renters aren't safe. When property owners face higher mortgage costs, they often pass the burden down through skyrocketing rents, trapping tenants in an endless cycle of rising living expenses. In short, Canada's housing market isn't just expensive, it's a bubble waiting to pop. And if it does, the fallout could be catastrophic, dragging millions of Canadians and the entire economy into one of the worst financial crises in modern history. Before we turn the page to what comes next, take a moment to join this journey with you. Subscribe so you don't miss where the story leads. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's a quiet reminder that this unfolding future connects us all, and if something here stayed with you, share it below. Your reflection becomes part of the larger conversation. The next chapter is only moments away. Together, we'll step into it.